Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat. I'm with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
As little as long ago, or as far away as forever, this is where we meet to celebrate what never was as it comes to pass. Welcome, friends. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here at freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio, and Studio B. I'm honored to have as guest with me Rob Skiba. He's done incredible work on, well, this will be the second in the series that I've been doing, covering the topic of the flat earth and also the release of my latest book, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. Rob's been doing really incredible work on this particular issue, and he's also got a new website called testingtheglobe.com, which everybody can go to see his latest work. But he's also an award-winning documentary filmmaker and a best-selling author of several books, 8, including Babylon Rising, The First Shall Be the Last, The Archon Invasion, The Rise and Fall, and Return of the Nephilim, which is always one of your and my favorite topics. And as an ancient Nephilim theorist, Rob brings a unique and often unheard perspective to the UFO alien discussion. He is now an internationally recognized public speaker on these subjects, often appearing on paranormal and prophecy talk shows and as a featured keynote speaker at conferences all around the world. He's a graduate of the Hollywood Film Institute. His lifelong dream has been to produce a powerful television and motion picture productions. He's currently working full-time on the development and production of Seed the series. Rob also has a couple of radio programs that he, well, I don't know if you still do the one on Blog Talk, but I know he's hosts a show Wednesday evening on Truth Frequency Radio, and so I'll get Rob to detail his individual books, where you can contact him, where you can support the purchase of his work, as well as keep up with his projects. Very busy individual, highly educated, well respected, and Rob, you do incredible investigative work on all the topics that you cover. So if you would please just provide your contact information, short commentary on yourself, and then if you would we'll go into just a short description of each one of the books that you've published.
Sure. Hey, Zen, thanks so much for having me on, man.
It's my honor, brother.
Yeah. Well, my primary website is BabylonRisingBooks.com. From there, you can get to just about everything else, with the exception of Testing the Globe. I don't think I have a link on there for that, as it's my most recent endeavor. And I'm sure we'll talk about that tonight.
Right.
But yeah, I've published 8 books. Babylon Rising, The First Shall Be Last is my first book. Published that back in January of 2012. The first chapter was called The Genesis 6 Experiment, and it was probably the shortest chapter in the book, just sort of setting the stage for the topic of the Nephilim. And from then I went on to discuss primarily Nimrod, Babylon, and how our government is steeped in all of that stuff. So a lot of conspiracy type of things in that book. But after I published it, I realized I really got to unpack that first chapter. So my second book, Archon Invasion, The Rise, Fall, and Return of the Nephilim, is about a 366-page elaboration on chapter 1 of my first book. and it gets into the subject of the biblical timeline primarily of the Nephilim. I wanted to kind of do an all-encompassing work, but after I got to about over 350 pages, I thought, you know what, I better stop because I wouldn't read this book if I kept going. I mean, I do have some books that are over 350 pages, but most of the time, if I see a book that thick, it becomes a reference book only. It's like, I'll probably never read the whole thing, you know. So I thought, if I won't read it, nobody else will read it probably. So it's really Babylon Rising is sort of part one of what I intend to be a 4-part series, and Archon Invasion is part one of a 2-part series. And after I did that, I spent a lot of time talking about what I referred to as the synchronized, biblically endorsed extra biblical text. And by that, I was referring to the books of extra biblical books of Enoch, Joshua, and Jubilees. And after talking so much about it at conferences and stuff like that, I figured, you know what, I might as well just publish them. So I created one volume that includes the book of Genesis in the King James as well as the Septuagint side by side like a parallel Bible, because there are some pretty significant differences between the two, and I thought, you know, it'd be pretty cool to compare them. So that's at the beginning of the book is Genesis as a parallel, King James and Septuagint, and then it's the full books of Enoch, Joshua, and Jubilees all in one volume. And that's an 8.5 by 11 over 500 page deal. So it's kind of like, you know, it's one of those great for reference. I don't know if anybody's going to read it cover to cover, but some people might. And then the other 5 books that I did are Bible study workbooks. I call them the Wisdom from the Torah workbook series. And basically my goal with those were, I've been studying the Torah now for, well, this will be my 7th year now, going into 7th year. And what I realized is every single reference that we find in the scriptures to the word scripture, whenever, like, if you just did a keyword search on the word scripture throughout all the Bible, you'll find that in every single case, except for one, it's referencing the Torah, the prophets, and the Psalms, the writings, the Old Testament, basically. And it just makes sense because even in the New Testament, whenever they're talking about the scriptures, the New Testament hadn't been written yet. So that's what they were referring to. But I came to realize that the Torah is the Bible of the people in the Bible. In other words, that was the Bible that they were using. Yeah, all the prophets, the Psalms, they're all referring back to the Torah. And I had come across, I believe it's Luke 24, if I'm not mistaken, on the address, when Yeshua, Jesus, is walking on the road to Emmaus, and these guys that he's with, they don't recognize him. And it says that he began with Moses and the prophets to illustrate from the scriptures who he was. And it really struck me because I could tell you all about my Savior from the Gospels and the epistles of Paul, you know, the New Testament. And, you know, I could use Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22 and maybe a few other places. But I couldn't build a case for my Messiah from the Torah. And so my prayer became, all right, Father, you know, if that's what Yeshua did to illustrate who he was, then please do the same for me. Reveal yourself, reveal your son to me through the Torah. And that began a really amazing journey for me that I'm still on. And so for thousands of years, people have been doing what they call the Torah portions, where every week they take a portion from the Torah, sort of like a walk through the Bible, like the one-year Bibles, but specifically using the Torah, going through the Torah in a year, but also going through what's called the Haftorah, or the Haftorah, the prophets. And after the time of the New Testament, they began to incorporate New Testament scriptures that go along with the Torah portion. So my goal was to show, in each volume, I got one for Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, was to show how the themes of each Torah portion are literally woven throughout your whole Bible, throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I created them as workbooks so that there's plenty of space for you to take your own notes. After doing those Torah portions for 3 years myself, I had notebooks and stuff scribbled on things all over the place. I was like, I need to have one place to put them all in. So really, I created the workbook for myself, but the people in our home Bible study group loved it. So I thought, I'll just go ahead and publish these, and they've become pretty popular, even more so now that I'm starting to put the our Bible studies up on YouTube, and the word's starting to get out. So those are the 8 books that I've done, and that's all again available, and you can check them out on BabylonRisingBooks.com.
Well, that's a really awesome endeavor because, so many people nowadays, they believe that all you need to do is read the New Testament. You don't ever have to reference the Old Testament. And because they believe and think like that, they, are divorced from so much of what I
Yes.
consider to be very relevant and important teachings, especially when you're tracking down the whole because when I first read Genesis 6 about the sons of God mating with the daughters of man, I was like, what? What did I just read? And then looking into the wars, as far as the giants, the lineage of giants going all the way even to, David and Goliath and the battles between his bloodlines and the 4 brothers of Goliath and Og and Noah and all of that is just amazing information and
Yeah.
why people wouldn't want to study all that is just beyond me because there's so much there. But yeah, so I applaud you in your efforts to backtrack and to look and really research in detail how it applies to Yeshua as our Savior, because the Old Testament lays the foundation for the New, and you can't separate both because he was the fulfillment, especially when you start looking at the Leviticus 23 feast days and how he
Yes.
fulfilled the spring and summer feasts and how he will fulfill the fall feasts. All of that is just so very important.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so before we go into the topic that we'll be predominantly covering this evening, also when I turn it back over to you, if you would provide your where people can contact you and support your, as far as the different websites. I know that you say you had more than those 2 that were mentioned, but
Sure. Yeah, I'll just kind of I'll run down them. As you mentioned in the introduction, I am on truthfrequencyradio.com on Wednesday evenings. In fact, tonight after I get off with you, we go live at 11 p.m. Central. So on truthfrequencyradio.com is my radio show. I still have my archives up on my blog talk show, blogtalkradio.com/revolutionary radio. There's probably well over 200 shows up there. And I'm going to try to uh, archive my Truth Frequency shows over on the Blog Talk one too, because a lot of people have the iTunes RSS feed, so it makes it easier for them. So I intend to do that. If people are interested in the Bible studies that I've been talking about related to the Torah portions, it's at virtualhousechurch.com. And something you said a minute ago, Zen, is so true. So many of us as Christians, and I've said it myself, I'm a New Testament Bible believing Christian, and it's true, I am. However, that's sort of like going to Barnes and Noble or Borders or someplace and getting the greatest novel ever written and skipping 3/4 of the book,
right,
you know,
right.
and just start reading at the last 25% and thinking you actually have a clue who the characters are, what their motivation is, what the plot is. So yeah, I really do believe that it's time to get back to Genesis, and Isaiah 4:6-10 says that God declares the end from the beginning. So really, if you want to understand Revelation, you actually got to go back to Genesis. And my wife had this idea several years ago. She said, why don't we try reading both ends toward the middle? Read Genesis and Revelation and Exodus and Jude and sort of work our way,
Oh,
toward
that's
the middle.
cool.
Yeah, and it was a novel idea. I thought, that's interesting. Sure, why not? I've done plenty of other 1-year Bible plans. Why not try that? Well, I didn't get very far in especially when you start getting into Exodus, having just read Revelation along with Genesis, that you quickly realize that Revelation is just an amped up repeat of the Exodus. The plagues are the same. I mean, I actually created a parallel chart showing the plagues of Exodus with the plagues of Revelation, and they're play by play, man. Revelation is just an amped up repeat of Exodus. So if people are interested in sort of, I put it on live. It was every Friday nights. I did it live for 2 years, 2012 and 2013, and all the archives are up there and all the notes and stuff that we talked about. So if they want to check that out, it's at virtualhousechurch.com. I already mentioned BabylonRisingBooks.com, which came as a result actually of my blog, which is BabylonRisingBlog.com. All the books came out of the blogs. And I wrote for 2011, basically the entire year. I just wrote nonstop. So I woke up in the morning, whatever I thought about, I wrote about. And at the end of the year, I decided to see how much I wrote. So I sort of pulled down from blog format into some print format software and realized I had well over 1,000 pages of print content. I said, whoa, man, I should make books out of these. So Babylon Rising Books came out of BabylonRisingBlog.com. And all of that is really the nonfiction foundation upon which the science fiction TV series that I'm working on is being built. And that's at seedtheseries.com. So those are the primary websites people can check out. And of course, there's contact information on the websites.
Well, I know that you have a ton of information at testingtheglobe.com. Do you plan on doing the same that you did with Babylon Rising? And what
Yes.
are you gonna? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
any idea on timeline on for that?
Well, I've got an experiment that actually two experiments that I'm working on. I'm not going to really share the details on it, but two experiments that I'm hoping to do within the next month or two, if at all possible. And it's going to cost a little bit of money, but if I can do these two experiments, because right now my problem with testingtheglobe.com is I haven't really come to a definitive conclusion. I have concluded, no questions asked, absolutely definitively, I know the Bible is a flat earth book from Genesis to Revelation. There's no question in my mind about it. However, First Thessalonians tells me that I should test or prove all things. So that's what I've been trying to do. Testingtheglobe.com really came as a result of going through an in-depth study of the scripture. I've got a whole section just on the Bible and the still flat earth that's rather lengthy. And when I went through the scriptures to see what it had to say about the heavens, what it had to say about the earth, what it had to say about the sun, moon, and stars, I came away just going, wow, what do I do with this? Because, this is a flat earth book, man.
Right.
And that's what launched me on the journey that I'm still on. But proving it is rather interesting. Yes, there are a lot of terrestrial-based observations that anybody can do that, frankly, reveal it's flat. But then you always have the yeah but guy shows up. Well, yeah but this and yeah but it's a mirage and yeah it's a light refraction and blah blah blah. I'm going, okay, I'm gonna come up with a test that will get rid of the yeah but guy. And so that's what I'm working on. And once I get the results of that, and if it turns out the way that I anticipated it's going to turn out, then I'll be a lot more conclusive, openly and in public. Because people are asking me all the time, well, are you a flat earther or not? I said, well, at this point, I am most comfortable calling myself a zetetic agnostic. And zetetic just means basically science by inquiry, going out and asking questions and doing investigations by observation. And an agnostic, most people hear agnostic and you think, well, you don't believe in God? Well, that's one definition for agnostic. But basically an agnostic is somebody who is not at least convinced in their own mind that they can prove the existence of something either way. Most often associated with God. I obviously do believe in God. But when it comes to the issue of the earth and the shape and nature of it, I know what the text says, but trying to prove it so far has been inconclusive for me. There's a lot of great evidence for the flat earth, no doubt about it. I've been putting it up. But there's also, a lot of stuff, to be fair, trying to be objective here, there's a lot of stuff that I can't debunk on the globalist side. So at this point, I'm basically saying, hey, let's start asking the questions, because I'm 46 years old. I don't know about you, Zen, but I have never questioned the globe in 46 years of my life until April 15th or April 13th of this year. was the beginning of my questioning it. So, testingtheglobe.com is, as one section of it says, it's one man's quest for truth, and that's me. I'm the man that's on the quest for truth in this case, and it's basically been my online journal of discovery, of inquiry, of investigation, and once I get to where I feel like I've got a pretty solid conclusion, then I'll start publishing a book. I have a book already in the works, just waiting for that final chapter, I guess, to be written.
Well, that's awesome, and you're smart to be careful in respect to this, and I think it's also wise to be kind of hush hush on your endeavors just until you're ready to release. That was the same way that I was with my latest endeavor with this book that I just released. I didn't want to give out too much detail on that either.
Yeah.
And you're right. Yeah, I never had reason to question my belief in the globe. I just assumed that, because it had been what I thought to be, scientifically affirmed over the last 500 years, and there would be no reason to doubt all those assumptions. But lo and behold, there is reason to look into and to try to determine, at least objectively, open-mindedly go into the debate of, is the earth really flat or spherical? And I think everybody should do that investigation, and that people would be surprised at what they might actually find, and maybe we're not as sure of what we think we know. Um,
Yeah.
but before we're going to come up to the first break in about 5 minutes, but I want to give you a chance before we go into this to talk about kind of how you woke up to, the whole what woke you up to the introspection into all of these things, the Nephilim, the conspiracy side of life and reality, kind of your journey to, awakening and to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be able to answer that before the break, but
Yeah,
I'll
well, we can just start it and we'll pick it up on the other side.
continue it. Well, the Genesis 6 thing is something I've always been interested in. I mean, what kid is not interested in giants?
Right.
If you grew up in church, David and Goliath. I mean, I've done, dress up as David, with the slingshot and, the whole deal for skits and whatnot. And we all grew up with, Gulliver's Travels and, Jolly Green Giant. And, there's always like this giant thing it just comes with the territory, I guess. We grew up with it. So it's something I've always been interested in. But the more I looked into it in the Bible, the more I realized, wow, I mean, nobody's, at least in my sphere of influence growing up, was talking about it. Other than David and Goliath, but that's about it. That's about all you get in church. But as I started to dig in and look for more evidence of giants and whatnot in the Bible for myself, I found out, wow, I mean, the Old Testament is Lord of the Rings. I mean,
Right.
it's just loaded with epic, crazy battles and stuff. But what it did for me, Zen, was growing up as a New Testament Bible believing Christian, we didn't spend a lot of time in the Old Testament. Yes, there was the Sunday school lessons and stuff that we'd get little bits and pieces of, but most of the time church, and I was one of these Sunday school, Sunday morning service, Sunday night service, Wednesday night service, vacation Bible school kind of guys. It's like we were always doing something with the church and the Bible, but not really diving too deeply into the Old Testament. And whenever I would do those one-year Bible plans, I wouldn't get too far in before I would start getting tweaked out. And I remember back in the early 90s, I want to say maybe even 1990, 1991, somewhere thereabouts, possibly even late 80s, I had this idea of I'm going to get a notebook and I'm going to start in Genesis, and I'm just going to journal my thoughts as I'm reading through the Bible and write down questions that I have as I'm reading it. And hopefully, as I continue reading, that I'll be able to answer the questions that I have, just doing my own personal study. And I would always get bogged down where in the Torah you would find these various campaigns that the Israelites were on, where God would be saying, kill the women, kill the children, kill the animals, wipe out everything, utterly destroy everything. But that wasn't always the case. Sometimes they had these battles where the standard rules of war applied. Of course, the men would, they would fight the men, but they could keep the women and children and the animals and whatnot as spoils of war. So you're kind of left with this feeling that God is schizophrenic and prejudiced, and it's a random acts of genocide. It's like,
Right.
and I would just have to stop because I was getting so tweaked out. Like, I don't know what to do with this. And yet you get to the New Testament, John, I think it's chapter 14, where Philip asked Jesus, show us the Father and it'll be sufficient. And Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen my Father. Well, that never computed in my head, man, because it's like, here's Yeshua. He's this amazing, loving guy. He's hanging out with publicans and sinners. He's not the only people he judged were the religious people. He's healing people, casting out demons. This amazing, loving, awesome guy. And he says, if you've seen me, you've seen my dad. And I'm going, that doesn't make sense, because dad's really scary and you're not so scary. It's kind of like this good cop, bad cop thing,
Right.
And then that was all through my childhood and well into the 90s. But going into the 2000s, I ended up finally coming across the materials of Steve Quayle and then later Tom Horn. And I heard a statement that Steve Quayle had made. He said, the understanding of Genesis 6 is the Rosetta Stone for understanding all of Scripture and history. And that seemed like a rather grandiose statement to make, but at the time. But then after I started to look into Genesis 6 a lot more and really dive into it, I got what he said. And
Right.
now I would absolutely, say I agree 100% with that statement. Because as soon as you get what's going on in Genesis 6, the whole Bible starts to make a lot more sense, and history does as well. So I'd studied that stuff for most of my life, but didn't really start to get a clue as to what I was looking at until probably the mid 2000s, and then going into the 2010 through today, I got real intentional about writing about it, talking about it, getting on the public scene, and of course publishing books eventually and DVDs about it too. So that's where my sort of the genesis, if you will, of that was. But in the process of doing that, I found out a lot of really intriguing things regarding Nimrod and how I believe he relates to end times and the Antichrist and things of that nature. And so that gave me something more to dig.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. I have as guest with me this evening Rob Skiba. Rob, I'm going to give you a chance to finish what you were speaking about, but also when you decide to go into the topic of the flat Earth, if you'll open with the answer Nimble Horse posted in the chat room. The Bible verse that he stretcheth out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon nothing. And I just heard you actually speaking about that in a show that you did on the pillars. So when you're done with your awakening story, if you would go into that.
Sure. So yeah, I was just talking about going through the Bible and the Nephilim and Nimrod and all that stuff. And of course, to study those two subjects, the Nephilim and Nimrod, you're spending a lot of time in the Torah. And while I was doing that and finding all kinds of really wild and amazing, cool stuff in regard to those two subjects, I was also beginning to find Yeshua in the Torah. And it's sort of like God used that stuff as the bait, to draw me in, to get me fascinated, and to say, hey, while you're looking at it, check this out, and so that's sort of a sideline that really got me intrigued, not just in the Torah but also in the Hebrew language in general. I ended up taking a Hebrew 101 twice. That shows you my aptitude for picking up another language. But what I did learn out of it was the Hebrew language is really fascinating, and that every Hebrew letter, just the letters themselves, have meanings, and up to 7 meanings. And we learned in idiom in class that if every letter has 7 meanings, then every word has 70, because you have not only the meaning of the word itself, but you have the combined meaning of the letters that comprise the word, as well as the meaning of the 2 or 3 letter sheresh, the root word, from which a lot of words are derived by adding prefixes and suffixes. And there's numerical values, so then you get into sort of the biblical gematria type stuff and Bible codes and all that kind of stuff. And I just was completely amazed by it, and very intrigued, and wanted to know more and continued to dig. And what I found in my Nephilim research was that, those chapters where you get to so and so begat so and so begat so and so, and you
Right.
usually skip past it because you can't pronounce the names.
Right.
You know, man, there's a treasure trove of information in a lot of them. I'm not sure that in every single one, but in a lot of the ones that I looked into, the genealogies are given in very specific orders, not just because of the chronology in which people are born, but a lot of times because there's a meaning that's being conveyed there. Because, like, for instance, we have Jacob has 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, we know the birth order, but they're not always given in their birth order through the scriptures. Sometimes they have them listed out of order. And when you look up the meanings of their names, what their names mean, and put it together in sentences and paragraphs, there's like hidden codes there.
Right.
And I first got intrigued by that I saw something Chuck Missler did with the first 10 patriarchs before the flood,
Yes.
from Adam to Noah. And just in summary, if you take the meaning of the names of the 10 patriarchs from Adam to Noah and just string them together in a sentence in the order that they're given, you end up with: man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching that with his death the despairing shall find rest. And I mean, that's like the plan of the whole Bible,
Right. Right.
just in the meaning of the 10 patriarchs' names. So that's what got me. I'm like, I wonder if that happens, more often than just
Hmm.
in that one scenario. And when I was doing my Nephilim research and looking through the Table of Nations and realizing that every single post-flood Nephilim that we read about in the Old Testament can be traced back to the people given in Genesis 10:6 through 20 specifically. And when you look at Genesis 10:6 through 20 at the names in Hebrew and just string their names together in a paragraph, this is what you end up with. He raged, a black terror, double straight afflicted trafficker. Black terror, drink thou anguish, compass the chamber. Thunder compasses the smiting. He who is coming, their love, we shall rebel. And then we shall rebel, that's Nimrod. A double straight firebrand, travailing, affliction of water, blades opening the moistened morsel, forgiven ones bowing to spy. A trafficker, hunting terrors, trodden downsayers, the strangers draw near. Showers of life, gnawing like thorns, they shall break loose, double woolen enclosures of wrath.
Wow.
And I mean, that's just taking the meaning of their names and putting them together in a sentence. I'm going, there's something up with those kids, because I mean, what prompts the proud parents of a newborn baby to look at each other and say, enclosure of wrath? What do you think, honey? You know what I mean? Like, why would you name your kid Terror or
Right.
Enclosure of Wrath unless there's something clearly wrong with the kid? And those, incidentally, are the same ones that God repeatedly tells the Israelites to utterly destroy, including women and children. So that's when all of a sudden all those old ideas of this strange, crazy God of the Old Testament becomes this amazing God of love
Yes.
and mercy, trying to protect his good creation from abominations, basically.
Right.
So, that was my journey into all that. Now, on the flat Earth side of things, well, I was going to do my taxes. It was April 13th, so nothing like waiting till the last minute, right? Well, my accountant is an hour and a half drive from where I live, so a lot of times I'll download podcasts or something to listen to it when I got to drive like that, and here in Texas everything takes like an hour to get to, so a lot of times I'm downloading podcasts, and there's a number of people I like listening to, and Canary Cry Radio is one of them, Basil and Gons, and
Right.
I saw that they had done a show with this guy named Mark Sargent on Flat Earth, and I'm thinking, what is this, April Fool's joke or something? Because they're kind of crazy, goofy guys over there, and
Uh-huh.
they do things for fun. So I'm thinking, maybe this would be a fun show to listen to. So I went into it realizing, okay, this is not a joke, this is serious. But I'm rolling my eyes, thinking, this is ridiculous. Are you kidding me? This is stupid.
Right.
But by the time I finished the hour and a half show and got to my destination, my head's spinning. I'm going, what did I just hear? And I could barely concentrate when I'm, with the accountant. And I finished doing my taxes with him, and I got another hour and a half drive back home. So I thought, I'm going to listen to this again, So I listened to it a second time. And then I got home. I said, okay, I got to look up this guy's flat Earth clues that he was referring to. So I watched all 11 videos that he had on the flat Earth clues. And of course, when you watch stuff like that, YouTube populates other things, related type videos. So next thing you know, I'm listening to, Eric Dubay and Matt Boylan and some of these other guys that were the forerunners, I guess, in this movement, if you want to call it that. And I was obsessed with it. I'm going, what in the world what is happening here? So I thought, okay, I got to talk to one of these guys myself. So I put out some emails to these guys, and Mark Sargent was the first to respond. And so I had him on my show that Wednesday. So literally it was like I heard about it for the first time on the 13th, and then 2 days later he's on my show. And if you listen to the interview that I did with him, the whole time I'm saying, look, I still believe in the heliocentric expanding Earth model. I referred to the works of Neil Adams and his expanding Earth theory that I had just finished teaching about myself back in December of last year. It was something I very much subscribed to, the hollow Earth, expanding Earth theory. And so I'm saying that the whole time I'm interviewing Mark and trying to affirm what I think I believe, but I'm going, okay, but tell me more. You've got me intrigued, dude. So keep talking. And after that interview, because he had challenged me, he basically said, okay, I hear you saying, you believe in this spinning globe thing. I dare you to try to prove that without using the words NASA or the government.
Right.
Because the first thing you want to do is say, well, we've all seen the pictures.
Yes.
In our government-funded textbooks taken by Freemason Nazis from NASA. In fact, I grew up with the wallpaper covering one whole wall of my bedroom. Most of my childhood and early teen years, I had this wallpaper that was taken allegedly from the surface of the moon looking towards the Earth. It's like Earthrise kind of thing. They had that famous Apollo 17 picture of the Earth on it. So, I mean, that's been in my face most of my life, and was one of the things that I put that up there because I wanted to be an astronaut. That was my life's ambitions. The reason I joined the Army and went to flight school and flew helicopters, I did all that because my goal was to get into the space program. So I've got all this cognitive dissonance that we all have, maybe to some degree more than other people's have had, because it's like, I grew up on Star Wars and Star Trek, going where no man has gone before. Love all that stuff, and studied intensely with my life ambition to become an astronaut. So this is really challenging me, but when I started looking into the pictures, you start quickly finding words like composite, animation, and all kinds of stuff that are telling you that, well, you're not looking at something real.
Mm-hmm.
It's a computer generated deal. Now the Apollo 17 one is the only one prior to the one that was just released recently, the most recent Blue Marble. Were the only two official. I mean, it took them almost 50 years to release another official photograph that is not a composite. And you listen to somebody like Matt Boylan, and you look at the Apollo 17 one, and then you do some of your own research, which I did, downloading pictures from the NASA website of Apollo 17 mission with the Earth over the shoulder of the astronauts and whatnot, and bring it into Photoshop, and you start seeing weird anomalies like rectangular boxes around the Earth and stuff, So now I'm questioning everything that I've been taught and have seen. And then the second thing I did, which probably should have been the first thing I did, but the second thing I did was, okay, I got to go back to the scriptures, because I've used Isaiah 40:22 myself. In fact, this week's Torah portion is the third Torah portion in Genesis, and the half Torah portion is Isaiah 40, which includes verse 22, talking about the circle of the earth. And it's funny because if anybody listens to it when I post it this weekend, you'll hear me say, see, Isaiah 40:22, they, even way back in Isaiah's day, they knew the earth was a globe. I was preaching it myself. The circle of the earth means a ball. But after I realized that, because when I was looking at that and I'm going, okay, does it really say that? Because I tried to, when I went back to the scriptures, now I'm questioning, I'm listening to Mark Sargent and all these other guys. I'm finally questioning the globe and what I've been taught my whole life for the first time. So instead of trying to use the Bible to reinforce preconceived ideas. I decided, okay, I'm going to go back to the text and try to push all those biases aside, pretend I've never heard of a globe, and just read the text for what it says and see if I would get a spinning ball out of the text. And no way, dude. you, it when you take the whole counsel of scripture together, you end up with a circular, something that's inscribed into something else that has four corners, set on pillars underneath a dome that's not nothing. The earth is not moving under a dome within which the sun, moon, and stars are placed on day 4. And that one really tweaked me out because
Yes.
I taught creation science for years in Sunday school in my church, and it built upon the works of Karl Baugh and Kent Hovind, and used a lot of their materials and inserted my own thoughts and stuff. But and of course, if you go that route, those guys teach the canopy theory, that there was a canopy of ice surrounding the world, and I taught it myself, so I understand all the arguments. The problem is, if you go back to Genesis 1, it says he put the sun, moon, and stars on day 4
Right.
in the firmament, not outside
yes.
of it. And I'm staring at the text, and Zen, I have looked at that text. I can't tell you how many times.
Right.
I have looked at it, read it, underlined it, highlighted it, and taught it, and never saw it.
Yes.
And now, once I pushed all my preconceived biases aside, I'm literally staring at that thing going, it says in. And I'm looking it up in other English translations. I'm looking it up in Hebrew. I'm going, it says in. And now, and it got even worse when I started looking into the stars, because if you start questioning geocentricity and heliocentricity, this much I will say that I'm pretty convinced of. I have become quite convinced. I would say I might have 2% that I'm still holding on to, but I'm 98% convinced that this place is not moving, and it is the center of the universe. No matter what the shape of the Earth is, it's not moving. And that's based on good science. I mean, I didn't realize that there was such a rift in the scientific academic community, even in the secular academic scientific community, where there's some really good tests that have never been refuted or debunked that shows this place is not moving. And just if you take that alone, if this place is not spinning, you've ever been taught, even if it's a ball, you got to question everything. And it throws so much of the other stuff out the window. And so when I started, well, wait a minute, then if everything's in the dome, and when you start looking up the dome, you realize, the Hebrews were not the only ones, but I would lean towards the Hebrews cosmology, because we believe the Bible is divinely inspired by the Holy Spirit and written by men. But then you find out that everybody in the ancient Near East believed this way,
Right.
The Egyptians believed it. The sky goddess Nut. People have probably seen the hieroglyph of the woman stretched out in an arch over the people, stars in her body. That's the sky goddess Nut. And I started thinking, maybe that's why people think you're nuts if you start talking like this.
Yeah, that was a good one.
But I mean, they all had this snow globe concept. And I also had to bear in mind that these are people who were building megalithic structures and Aztec calendar stones in 3114 BC, and doing stuff that today, with all of our modern science and technology, we still can't figure out how they did some of the stuff they did. So these guys were not stupid cavemen. They were clearly brilliant people, yet they all believed the Earth was the cosmology of a snow globe. And so I'm looking at that going, wait a minute, if we're in the dome, the Hebrew described the firmament as firm. It's firmament is hard. Ezekiel tells you why, because it's God's throne's on top of it. Job refers to it as a molten metallic looking glass, or something that's beaten down metal to the point of shining like a mirror. So I'm going, well, there's a firm structure over this place, and the sun, moon, and stars, that means they have to be a lot smaller and a lot closer, and can't be what we've been told by Carl Sagan and Stephen Hawking and all those other guys. So I saw, okay, I'm going to do a keyword search on stars, and what are the stars biblically speaking? Come to find out, the Bible tells you the stars are angels.
Yes.
Most notably in Revelation 9:1, I saw a star fallen from heaven, and to him was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. So this is a a sentient being referred to as a star. And when I looked in the book of Enoch, it tells you point blank there's a class of angels called the luminaries that are stars that have a police officer named Raguel who's in charge of making sure they stay in formation, march in the pathway that God told them to march in, or they get put in this terrible place of punishment. So at that point, there's no way out for me, because I built my entire ministry and my life, in fact, on saying the Bible is my source for truth and I can take it literally. Well, if you've ever said that, welcome to the flat Earth snow globe, because that's what you end up with, and you can't get around it. You can try. You could try to tap dance out of it, but no, chug does not mean ball. And Isaiah is the only guy, at least in the English Bible, in King James, if you look up ball, he's the only guy that mentions anything of a spherical nature in chapter 22, verse 18, but he used a different word, dur. And the word he used for the earth, he didn't use dur, which means ball. He used chug, which means circle. And both Solomon and Job also use the same words to describe the earth, but they add the word inscribed, chakak, before it, that the circle is inscribed. Well, you can't inscribe a ball. You can inscribe a circle, but you can't inscribe a ball. So taking the entire counsel of Scripture as a whole, at this point, I'm going, well, I have got to keep looking, because either that or I've got to throw out any notion of the Bible as an absolute source of truth. I got to throw out any idea that the Bible is inerrant, that it's without error. I might as well throw out the idea that it's inspired by the Holy Spirit, because I can't wrap my mind around the idea that the Creator can't accurately describe his description to the people he's inspiring to write. And I certainly can't say I take it literally anymore. So you can see my dilemma.
Yes.
Because I do believe the Bible is divinely inspired. I do believe the Creator can accurately convey what he wants to convey to his people concerning his creation. And I do still maintain that we need to take it literally, because otherwise you run into the danger of private interpretation, and you can make up anything you want at that point.
Yes.
It's all allegorical. So, yeah. And now, to address the issue of pillars and hangs the earth on nothing, that's a recent one that I just put up on testingglobe.com. And if people want to read the whole thing, they can go to testingglobe.com/pillars.html, or in the main menu under One Man's Quest for Truth, you'll see right underneath angels as stars the link for Pillars of the Earth. Because that's something that the pillars thing I kept mentioning, but it was always in passing. Like I said earlier, it's a still flat earth set on pillars, which is about the extent of what I would say about it, because the Bible does talk about the pillars of the earth. So, but I realized something when I looked at Job 26:7. He stretches out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon nothing. I thought, well, earlier, Job, the same guy who wrote this, talked about the circle of the earth and it being set on pillars. So is the guy contradicting himself? Or what's going on here? And a lot of people will point to that scripture, as did I myself, said, see, this proves that Job is saying the earth is hanging or suspended or floating in nothingness. This proves the earth is floating in space. But that's not really what it turns out that he's saying. You know, if I said I am in want for nothing, you would understand that I'm saying I don't need anything. You know, if I said, Zen, there's nothing you could do for me, you would instantly understand that there's not anything that you could do for me.
Right.
So I started to look at that and go, wait a minute, is Job really saying the earth is not hung on anything? He hangs the earth on nothing could be the same way of saying it's not hung on anything. And you need two witnesses to establish truth. This is written throughout the scriptures. And you don't have a second witness for the idea that the earth is hanging on nothing. You have plenty of confirming witnesses that it is set upon something. You know?
There's a number of questions that are coming from the chat room. There's of course, I'm sure you've contended and dealt with this yourself. But people have asked me how we could prove that the earth is flat. And basically I tell them that there's no curvature and the earth isn't moving. And just with a stream of smoke, when you burn a fire and there's a stream of smoke moving, on windless days, it'll move straight up into the air. And unless the wind pushes it one way or the other, it will remain a straight column. Whereas if we were on a planet that's moving at 1,037 miles, 38 miles an hour, there would be no way that that column of smoke would rise in steady fashion. And also, if we were moving at that astronomical rate of speed, how there could be any day where you don't even feel the wind, where the flag outside of my in my front yard doesn't waver in any bit. The hair on your head is not tousled in any. You would think that moving at that kind of a speed, there would be just. I mean, you should at least be able to notice some kind of speed. I would also, some kind of velocity to the wind. I would also add that engineers, builders of bridges, canals, railroads over thousands of miles, they never take into consideration any kind of curvature to the earth. Um, Being able to see lighthouses, the Statue of Liberty, cityscapes over 20, 30, even sometimes 50, 60 miles out with telescopes or high powered camera equipment. This also verifies that there is no curvature, things like that. But I want to give you a chance to answer that question, because I would always say, well, why do people believe that the Earth is a globe and that we're moving at this incredible rate of speed when you don't see that visible in the creation, Rob?
Yeah, I just looked at the chat room and I see somebody there saying, "Oh, for F's,
Right.
curse word sakes, the Earth isn't flat. Prove it." I would say, "Prove it's a globe, and do
Right.
so with NASA, the government, or the military as your source," because those three sources are absolutely proven to be untrustworthy. So, it's fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Well, continue to believe pathological liars, and you're an idiot.
Exactly.
Um, so, that's the reason I created the website in the first place, testingtheglobe.com, for a reason, because I've never tested it. I've never, and I would dare say the person who's spouting off in the chat room has never tested it either. But they're just displaying the usual cognitive dissonance that all of us have. I had the same thing, man. People were on my Facebook page for probably 2 months trying to get me to look into this before I did. And my response was exactly the same as everybody else. The same knee-jerk reaction. What are you, an idiot? What are you, a moron? This is stupid. This was settled 500 years ago. Come on, I'm not going to look into that. It's freaking stupid. It was settled 500 years ago. We all have the exact same response. But I would dare say now, after 6 months, the 15th of this month, it was 6 months of doing nothing but looking into this stuff. From the time I wake up to the time I went to the bed, with the exception of some health problems that I had to deal with and family drama, that is all I have done since April 15th. I woke up in the morning thinking about it and was looking into stuff all day long until I went to bed. And most of the people who are having the knee-jerk reactions haven't done an hour's worth of research.
Exactly.
And I would challenge you, those of you out there who are having these knee-jerk reactions, shut up and take one day. Okay? Yes, I'm going to be forceful. Take one day. Shut up and do your own research. One day. Because if you do, you are going to come away with more questions than answers. You're not going to be nearly as so confident as you are right now in the chat room. You're not. And when you look into some of this stuff, like the Joshua Nowicki picture, for instance, taken for almost 60 miles away on the other side of Lake Michigan. There's a whole city. What's the excuse? Well, it's a mirage. Really? Have you ever seen a mirage? Mirages are typically inverted and wavy and distorted. You don't get perfectly symmetrical, completely, totally clear images like with the Joshua Nowicki picture. Now, some people say, well, that's a Photoshop. It's a fraud. Well, no, you could actually go and see. He's got a whole bunch of photos and video. You can actually watch video footage that he did, zooming in on it. But I'll do one better. Ask anybody who lives in that area if they've seen Chicago.
Right.
Because I had some of the same knee-jerk response. I live in Photoshop. A lot of the work that I do is in Photoshop. So I know for a fact that because I do it all the time, I create stuff that I can make you believe almost anything I want you to believe using Photoshop, After Effects, and some off-the-shelf 3D software. Give me enough time and let me just knuckle down and create something. I can make you believe almost anything. And that's just me with about $1,500 worth of computer equipment and a few software packages that cost anywhere from $300 to $500 a piece. When you think of what the government is capable of doing and what NASA with the billions of dollars that they have to work with, I mean, come on, look at if when people talk about the International Space Station and things like that. Look, watch the television show Extant, watch the movie Gravity, and go to the movie theater right now and watch the movie if you want to see what can be faked in a very believable way. Watch the documentary behind the scene footage of stuff by Stanley Kubrick when he made 2001: A Space Odyssey, and see what he did in 1967. Look at Star Wars, Star Trek. If this is what Hollywood can do, do you know Star Wars was made for $13 million? The original Star Wars movie, $13 million. And when you look at the movies that are coming out now and the blockbuster movies, you're in the ballpark of roughly 100 to 150 million for some of these special effects blockbuster movies. Okay, NASA has billions, trillions if adjusted for inflation of dollars to work with. So, spare me the evidence that's coming from NASA, the government, or the military, because they historically have been proven to be liars. How many times do you have to prove that somebody's a liar before you finally realize they're not trustworthy? Then when you go out there and try to do your own terrestrial-based observations, and you ask people who live on the other side of Lake Michigan from Chicago, my friend Rick Hummer lives, I think he said, something like 45 minutes away from the area where Joshua Nowicki took the picture. And he said, dude, we've all seen it. He got in trouble as a kid in school telling the teacher, well, if we're on a ball, how come, we can see Chicago? And in fact, I would love to go to that area and just do a man on the street with a camera, and a microphone, and interview people that have seen Chicago, and maybe even go there on a day when it's visible, and then show them the math. The math on the spherical Earth says you should not be able to see it. The top of the Sears Tower should be 900 feet below the horizon. The ground you're standing on and the ground Chicago is founded on, there's a half-mile difference. Okay? And yet people are seeing it. I went to Malibu, and I was having a meeting with one of the guys. It's a writer on the Seed the series, the sci-fi show I'm working on. And he said, Rob, I've been seeing your flat Earth stuff, and I got to tell you something. He told me the story about how he grew up as being a lifeguard on Ventura Beach. And he said on a clear day, we could all look out and see the Anacapa Arch. The Anacapa Arch is one of these island arches. It's got an arch that you could go under it with like a sailboat or something. The top of the arch is 25 feet above the ocean. The top of the island that is the arch is 40 feet above the water. And yet at 20 miles out, that should be 200 and something feet below your ability to see it. And the common saying was, oh, the arch is out today, clear day. So I said, dude, can you take this math? Because this was math that I had been seeing circulating the internet, showing the alleged drop-off of the curvature of the ball, what it should be using spherical geometry. The first mile is 8 inches, but it's not a slant. We're not, the Earth is not a slant. So the second is not going to be 16 inches because it's spherical geometry. The second mile is 32 inches. The third mile is 72 inches and so forth. So I had seen this math going around. I'm not mathematically inclined enough to confirm it. So I said, can you confirm this math for me? And he said, sure. He says, I got a good friend of mine who is a professor, a math professor at the local university. I said, perfect, but pose it to him as a word problem and see what he says. So he went to this guy, he's a math professor at a university, and said, we're supposedly the globe is 25,000 miles in circumference, right? Yeah. Well, what would the math be for if I wanted to know how far below the horizon an object is? It's 40 feet high and 20 miles away. How far below the horizon should the top of that object be? So simple word problem for a guy like that. He does the math, puts it on the board, confirmed what it said. At 20 miles out, The math says that it should be 266 feet. So if it's 40 feet high, then subtract 40 feet. So 220 something feet below the horizon. So this guy says to the math professor, okay, so you're telling me that is the spherical geometry for calculation on an object that's 40 feet high to 20 miles away. You're telling me it should be 220 plus feet below my ability to see it, right? Yep, that's correct. He turns to his friend and says, well, the problem is we've all seen it. And the math professor says, what are you talking about? He says, the Anacapa Arch. Now, all of a sudden, this math professor, who just put the math up on the board himself, turns around and looks at the chalkboard, and in his brain, I can only imagine the gerbil jumping off the wheel to the sound effect of the Flintstones, you know, the Flintstone sound effect, right? As this guy just realized that what he had seen growing up himself is mathematically impossible.
Right.
And for the skeptic out there who thinks he's all that and, you know, thinks that we're idiots for even talking about this, I'm going to call your bluff, okay? I'm going to tell you, if you think you know what you think you know, then challenge yourself, and there's 3 books you need to read. The first one is Zetetic Astronomy by Dr. Samuel Robidoux.
Excellent book.
Second one is 100 Proofs Earth's Not a Globe by William Carpenter. I think it's William Carpenter. And the third one is, it's William Carpenter. The third one is Terra Firma, Earth Not a Planet, Proof from Scripture, Fact, and Reason by David Wardlaw Scott. Now, these are all books that the first 2 were written in the 1800s. The Zetetic Astronomy was written in 1865. It's over 300 pages worth of terrestrial-based observation. Now, because this is 1865, this is pre-Wright brothers and certainly pre-NASA. So this is all stuff that you and I can repeat. We can replicate this stuff. If you say you are convinced the Earth is a globe, then go out and test it for yourself. Don't just regurgitate what you've been taught your whole life. Go out there and take this guy's book, and now we've got better equipment, you know, that we can use than he had, and over 300 pages of terrestrial-based observation, written in 1865. The second book, 100 Proofs Earth's Not a Globe, published in 1885. And, you know, I could go through those 100, and I did. I've read these 3 books. Because a true researcher needs to be objective and not just try to find stuff that supports what they already believe. You got to look at all the evidence. So these are good places to start for the counter evidence that counters the globe idea. I did go through the 100 proofs, and I would say there's a few that I could argue against, that I could be the yeah but guy and say, well, yeah, but this. But I could not refute all 100. And I would dare say nobody listening to this broadcast is going to be able to refute all 100 of them either. Probably the majority of them you're not going to be able to refute. The one book that I thought was the most interesting of the 3, though, is Terra Firma, The Earth Not a Planet, Proved from Scripture, Reason, and Fact by David Wardlaw Scott. This was written in 1901. So here we have, at the turn of the 20th century, a guy writing, and he referred to the works of the other guys that I just mentioned, but had some of his own information to throw in. So I would say, if you are absolutely convinced that you are on a spinning heliocentric globe, then test yourself. Go out and do the test, read these books, be objective, and then go outside and tell me how water curves. Because that was the question that was posed to me when I thought I was all that. When I was like Captain Arrogant and thought I knew everything, and, you know, of course we're on a spinning heliocentric ball. A friend of mine said, yeah, but Rob, how does water curve? I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I mean, look at the Pacific Ocean. How does the Pacific Ocean maintain the spherical geometry of 1 inch per mile squared, or whatever it is, for the spherical geometry? I mean, how do you bend the Pacific Ocean, or any other body of water for that matter, to maintain it? Well, our knee-jerk response is gravity. Well, gravity. Okay, ask any 10 secular spinning heliocentric globe model scientists what gravity is, and you're going to get 10 different answers, because they can't even agree on what gravity is. And all of that goes out the window of geocentricity is true, especially if stationary geocentricity is true. All of your Newtonian arguments go out the window. So you don't even know what Yeah, okay. An apple falls on the dude's head, and he writes the theory of gravity. And oh, by the way, 1666, the year 1666. Interesting. And the globe, if you look at any globe, it's tilted. What's the tilt? Look up the tilt of the Earth. You'll see it's 23.4 degrees. Well, 23.4 off of a 90-degree straight up and down, center, 90-degree center, subtract 23.4, 66.6 degrees. Really? I mean, why do the beast numbers have to keep popping up
Right.
in these arguments? So, I mean, these are the things that got me intrigued in the first place. These are the things that caused me to question the globe enough to want to go and test it. And all the people that are saying, well, for F's sake, you're an idiot, you're a moron, whatever, they haven't tested it. They're just regurgitating what they've been told their whole life.
Right. And I agree with you. I'm the same way. When I want to learn something, I go out and I read books and I really do the investigation, do the research. And the people here on Revolution Radio, you heard the first shows that I did when a friend of ours kept calling in and asking me to research the topic. And back then, I wanted nothing to do with it. I was just like Rob, just like those of you that are hesitant to look into it now, I thought it absolutely a complete waste of time. And being productive and valuing my time, I did not in any way want to give or dedicate any time to looking into this topic at all. But eventually, my friends convinced me, because I had told people, asked them to be open-minded about other topics of my research, and it was either open my mind and open myself to this possibility, do at least one day of investigation into it, or prove myself a hypocrite. And so I did. I put aside everything, decided I was going to give one full day, dedicate to watching some of the videos, looking into some of this information. I also watched the Flat Earth clues and several other things that had been sent to me. And I was blown away that I found something that it was relevant. And I began to, even after that first day or after a couple days, I was questioning myself as to why I believed that we were on a globe, and why we all have bought into that and have believed that whole premise, the whole concept of that even the earth is moving. And then when I learned, basically having looked into all these things, that you cannot measure any curvature. Curvature does not exist. The engineers, again, for the railroads and canals and these huge, long, very long bridges, there's no curvature put into the blueprints of building those things. And when I realized that there's no curvature and understood that the earth is not moving, I mean, again, the fact that a stream of smoke goes straight up into the air on a windless day lets you know that the earth is not moving, especially not at the degree that they are saying it does, that we're moving at 1,038 miles an hour and that we spin once daily as we annually move around the sun. And then things like the airplanes. Can you imagine the nightmare of airplanes trying to land on an Earth that is moving faster than the planes that they're flying? I mean, the airline commercial airline flights would not exist. Pilots would not even survive their training. And so these kind of things, when you really start to open yourself to the possibility, look into some of these queries, then you will find yourself in the same position as both Rob and I, and you'll ask yourself why you believe in a globe and why you believe the Earth is moving. Anyways, when we get back from break, we will answer some of these other questions. Rob, people are asking about what you think about the other planets, and also, what's the edge or what's the outer portion of the Earth. You could probably answer these maybe before we get to break, but do you want to pick those two up and then we'll pick it up on the other side?
Yeah, well, the planets, I mean, look, I come from a Judeo-Christian background, and I'm going to go off of what the Bible says. I have looked through telescopes and seen the planets myself, and even with the moons, around Jupiter and all that, I've seen it. So they're real. They're there. I know they are. I'm not going to deny that. But how big they are and how far out they are is now a big question in my mind if we are under a dome. The ancients were in unanimous agreement about this, of the snow globe model. Anybody who denies that hasn't done a 5 minutes of historical research. It's undeniable. And any scholar who's being 100% honest with himself and with the text will tell you that that's what the Bible says. In fact, Logos Bible Software has a picture that's now probably become famous on the internet because of this topic, showing what the Hebraic model was for the cosmos based on what we would say is Holy Spirit inspired scripture. So the ancients, whether you believe the Holy Spirit inspired scriptures or not, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, even the Greeks, the Norse, they all describe this thing. So if we're under a dome, then the planets have to be a lot smaller and a lot closer. And I'll be honest with you, I'm really questioning all the stuff that we are seeing, the Pluto pictures and the so-called stuff from Mars, especially when you do a Google Earth search and look at, I forget the name of the island now, but just to the northwest.
Greenland?
Yeah, just to the northwest of Greenland. It's an island of Canada.
Oh, okay. Right.
That looks exactly like the Mars pictures. And NASA's even acknowledging this is their training camp.
Right.
Doing stuff. Well, I mean, great. Okay, I can understand training in an environment that would be similar to where you're going. I get that. But I would also say it could be just as plausible that you use that exact same environment to take some compelling pictures and video and pass it off as real. I mean, how would we know? Especially since it looks exactly the same. So
And they got rovers out there too, and Mars exploratory. This that whole mission, and I guess they have it on their trailers, Mars exploratory research and stuff like that.
Yeah, we're not gonna have time to get to it before the break, but I definitely want to address the edge.
Right. All right. We'll be right. All right. Welcome back for final segment, everybody. Rob, before we get to these other questions, I'd like for you to give out your contact if you want to share that, your website information, and where people can go to find your radio programs and your books.
Sure. BabylonRisingBooks.com would be my primary website. You can contact me through that. TestingTheGlobe.com is the site that contains the content we're talking about now. And if you go to TruthFrequencyRadio.com and just scroll through the speakers list, you can see me there and go to my page there. And my YouTube channel is just my name, Rob Skiba.
All right. There's a lot of dialogue going on in the chat room, but the last question I remember that we were going to cover was the outer limits, the ends of the earth. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, early on in my investigation into this topic, I created a section called Easy Globalist Arguments to Refute. And basically what I had tried to do right from the very beginning was what I call flip the board. If I'm playing, I'm not like a chess master or anything like that, but I enjoy the game. I love playing chess. And if you and I were playing Zen, I would be in my mind's eye trying to flip the board to see what you're seeing from your side. I'm making my offensive moves to try to get to your king or whatever piece I'm wanting to take, and you're trying to do the same. So when you're making a move, I'm in my mind's eye, I'm trying to imagine I'm sitting on your side of the board, flipping the board to see, okay, what does Zen see? Why did he just make that move? Was that a stupid move, or did he make that move because I've just made a stupid move myself? Does he see an opening? What's his strategy? What are you thinking? And so I tried to do that with this subject is say, okay, I know all the arguments that I would have in favor of the globe. I have the same arguments everybody has. What about this? What about that? What about this? So I decided to say, well, if I flip the board and decided to think like a flat earther, how would I address my own arguments? And so in order to flip the board in that case, I had to do a little bit of research in order to think like a flat earther, in order to combat my own questions. And so I put together a list of what I called the globalist arguments. And that's what I call globalist argument number 2. Well, if the Earth's flat, how come ships aren't going over the edge? Why can't I just take a canoe and fly off into space? As one of your people in the chat room was mentioning. Well, I mean, that's one of our knee-jerk reactions. But if you actually look into what flat earthers believe, and indeed what the biblical model says, this thing's enclosed, so you're not going to fall off any edge. But you would encounter on the flat Earth map, Antarctica is the outer rim of the circle. And if you just do a Google search on coastline of Antarctica, you're going to find a lot of pictures of 200 and 300 foot high ice and stone cliff faces. So that sort of addresses the issue. The famous picture we've all seen of the ships going off the waterfall, off the edge of the Earth. You're not going to go off any edge because you're going to encounter a 200 to 300 foot cliff. In fact, Captain, I think his name was James Cook, if I remember right, was one of the first to go beyond, I think it was the 78th parallel or 80th parallel, something like that. He got to within telescoping range of this coastline, the 200, 300 foot high coastline. And so he decided, well, I'm going to see if I can circumnavigate this thing and find an opening to maybe go through. And it took him 3 years and 60,000 nautical miles to circumnavigate Antarctica. This is in his own ship's log. So you're like, well, wait a minute. If the Earth is only 25,000 miles in circumference at the equator, then you're at the shallow part of the ball down in Antarctica. And Antarctica is really not a whole lot bigger than Australia, if you look at a globe. So why did it take him 3 years and 60,000 miles to go around this thing? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then when you get later into, that's in the 1700s, you get into 1800s and then into early 1900s with Shackleton. Interestingly enough, in 1908, getting on a ship called the Nimrod, going on the Nimrod expedition to try to find Antarctica. What I found interesting about that is Nimrod was born in 1908 AM, according to the biblical text, year since creation. So, here's this guy, Nimrod, who, of course, later builds a tower to try to reach into heaven, which has taken on a whole new meaning with this enclosed world idea. And then in 1908 AD, on a ship named the Nimrod, going on the Nimrod expedition, these guys are going down to Antarctica. And when you keep looking into the expeditions into Antarctica, of course, you eventually get to Admiral Byrd and Operation High Jump in the 1940s. Well, why'd they call it Operation High Jump? Well, because when they finally got there, they had to jump over a 200-300 foot high cliff. So they took the aircraft carriers with the helicopters and airplanes and stuff to get down there to do the high jump. So you're not going to fall off an edge. And even then, when you find that, and if you manage to get up on top of the thing, I have been asking people, do you know anybody who's gone more than 800 miles in a straight line inland from the coast? And I met a guy just a couple months ago who was stationed in Antarctica for 3 years as a cook for Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. And so I asked him, I said, did you ever go more than 800 miles in a straight line toward this alleged pole from your coast, or did you know anybody with any of the people that you worked with that did? And consistently, the answer keeps coming back, no. Now, I found people who have gone more than 800 miles, but it wasn't in a straight line. They went in a curved line from one coast to another, but it wasn't straight across. So, I mean, that's my question is, has anybody gone more than 800 miles? And to date, I have not yet encountered anybody who has said yes and could document it for me. So this is why I'm questioning this stuff.
Right. A couple other observations just with, the whole solar system and the belief that the Earth is in orbit around the sun. 3 other things that came to mind when I was studying this information that made me question this whole premise was the way that the phases of the moon have been, they've been constant for thousands of years. And if we're circling, and the moon is circling around us at the same time that we're circling around the sun, the patterns, the phases of the moon could in no way remain constant. The other thing, as far as the constellations and what we see in can observe in the night sky, as far as the zodiac, the houses of the zodiac. If we're moving in complete circle around the sun, if we're in 6 months and we're on the opposite side of the sun, we should see there should be some kind of difference to the stars that we're seeing at night. But this, again, is the zodiac remains constant, even though it also is moving in circle around Polaris as the fixed star. Um, it's still the zodiac, the houses of the zodiac have remained constant again for thousands of years. And then the other thing with the hours of day and night, if in 6 months we're on the opposite side of the sun, the hours of day and night should flip flop. And what is 12 hours of day should, on the other side of the earth, be 12 hours of night. But the time, as far as the hours of day and the hours of night, do not deviate more than 1 hour of daylight savings time twice a year, which, in my opinion, these three things again verify that we can in no way be moving around the sun, because all of these observations, these direct observations that all of us can make ourselves, verify that that the Earth is not moving in such manner as is postulated with the whole solar system principle. And then the other thing, as far as the sun being 93 million miles away, when you watch it going down during sunset, sometimes there will be clouds in front of the sun and behind the sun. And how is that possible if the sun is 93 million miles away and nowhere near the earth? How could clouds somehow get behind it? Another thing with its setting as it's declining during sundown is when the rays will stream and fan out from the center of these clouds, and they will come to the earth in all different angle. Whereas if it was 93 million miles away, all of the rays should be parallel to one another. And the other thing with when you watch sunset on a beach across a huge body of water, there will be a pillar of light all the way from where the sun is above the ocean in the skies to the feet of the observer. And there will be this constant stream. And this stream will remain until the sun goes down, reaches vanishing point, and disappears from view. But the fact that there is this pillar of light all the way streaming between the observer and the sun verifies that the land, or in this case the ocean waves, that it's perfectly flat all the way to the point where the sun is positioned above those waves. Otherwise, there would be a break in this stream, and there's no way that it could reach you in the manner that it does. And so, in my opinion, these three things which we can directly see verify that the sun is in no way 93 million miles away. Especially, clouds being behind the sun, there'd be no way possible that could happen. Rob?
Yeah, I've seen some of that footage. I've reserved. I have not commented on any of that stuff because I could go either way on the clouds issue being in front of or behind it. But I will say that now that my mind has been open to questioning these things, the usual model that we've all been taught regarding the sun and moon just don't work. I was sitting in my pool. This was probably May or June, so pretty early on in my investigations of all this stuff. And it was one of those days where the sun and moon are up at the same time. And there's plenty of times when the sun and moon are both up in the sky and you can see them. Mm-hmm. And we're all taught that the moon is receiving its light from the sun. Some people think that the curved phases of the moon are the Earth's shadow. That is not true, even in the spinning heliocentric globe model. The phases of the moon are not caused by the Earth's shadow. In the standard model, we've all been taught the phases of the moon are based on angles of the sun and moon, and the moon reflecting the light of the sun. However, I'm laying there, I'm sitting in my pool looking up, and both the sun and moon are in the sky, pretty high up at the same time, and the sun, I'm looking at the angle of where the sun is compared to where the moon is, and looking at the shadow that is portrayed on the moon, and they're not matching. They're off by anywhere from 10 to 20 degrees. You know, if the moon's if the light part of the moon is the result of the reflected light of the sun, then the shadow needs to be at the angle of where the sun is. You know, the terminator. Let's say you got a half moon, then the terminator line should be parallel with the sun, but it's not. It's off by 10 to 20 degrees sometimes, and it gets even worse in the waning phases of the moon, when the moon goes through its waxing phase, its full moon, and then waning phase. The angles are all wrong, and I would just challenge people: start going out there and look at, especially in the days when the sun and moon are up at the same time. And the eclipse, this last blood moon eclipse, really tweaked me out, because the office where I'm at right now has a parking garage, and from the roof of the parking garage, I've got a great line of sight of both the east and the west, where the sun comes up and the sun goes down and everything. And the night we had the blood moon, the moon popped up over the eastern horizon at about 7:11 p.m. and the sun went down at about 18 p.m. So about 7 minutes later, the sun went down. But 45 minutes later, the moon's going into an eclipse. And we're all taught that the blood moon is the result of the sun and moon being 180 degrees from each other, with the Earth in the middle, and the moon going through the penumbra cone-shaped phase of the shadow of the Earth. So I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, how the heck did the sun get 180 degrees different, away from the moon that I'm looking at now, coming up almost straight over me in 45 minutes? How did the sun get 100? How the heck did that happen? How did the sun or the Earth get into a position where it's in the middle, such that the sun and moon are opposed to each other, 180 degrees opposite each other in 45 minutes? But that wasn't the biggest problem I had with what I saw. The moon, I'm looking at the moon, I'm looking towards the east. The moon just come up in the east, and as it started to go into a lunar eclipse, 45 minutes after the sun went down directly behind me in the west, if the sun went behind me in the west, and I'm looking at the moon, and the Earth is the cause of the lunar eclipse, then the shadow of the Earth should have came from the bottom up. But it didn't. It came from the left to the right, which was from the north. I mean, none of it made any sense. I don't have the answer. I posted a video with the question. I'm going, look, I don't have the answer, but I will tell you that I've got more questions, because the standard model that we're all taught did not work on the night of the blood moon lunar eclipse. I mean, I can't figure it out. Maybe I'm stupid. Okay, fine, I'm stupid, but I haven't found anybody that's given an intelligent answer that can describe how the heck the Earth, and the sun and moon got to within 180 degrees of each other in 45 minutes, and the shadow came 90 degrees opposite of the direction it should have come.
I would add that there are historical cases, and I believe I posted links to terra firma, and as well as the Earth Not a Globe from sacredtext.com in the chat room. But if I remember correctly, it's in the Earth Not a Globe, where there are cases documented of the sun and the moon being above the horizon, both of them being above the horizon and visible at the same time that a lunar eclipse happens, which, again, throws the whole the scientific assertion that the Earth it's the shadow of the Earth on the surface of the moon that causes lunar eclipses. I mean, how can that be if the Earth is below both the sun and the moon, and they're both above the horizon and visible, and a lunar eclipse is happening? So that's something else to consider.
Recently, too, because it's in the book, and I quoted it in one of my videos. I read from the book several documented historical cases from the 1800s and earlier course, that's when the guy's writing, of documented cases where the sun and moon are both up above the horizon and the moon's going into a blood red lunar eclipse. I mean, that's how the heck is that? That's impossible according to the standard model. But I thought, because when I started posting that, people started, well, how come there's no evidence of it? How come we've never heard of it? And that's never happened since then, and blah, blah, 1800s. And how do we know that guy's right? And blah, blah, blah. Well, I came to find out that they've happened recently. Like within the last 5 to 10 years, there have been 2 or 3 blood red lunar eclipses documented within the last 5 to 10 years where the sun and moon were up at the same time. And what's their excuse? What's their answer? Oh, refraction.
Right.
Of course, it's got to be refraction. It's got to be a mirage or a refraction. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. There's something's not right. Again, I don't have the answer, but the answers that I've been hearing, they don't jive with observation.
Right. Another question from the chat room for you, Rob, from Casey. How high do you think the dome is above the Earth?
That's a great question. I'll say up front, I don't know. If what I've been reading is true concerning the sun and moon, it varies, but the furthest out that I've seen the sun and moon is 3,000 miles. And of course, it's a lot smaller. People using sextants and stuff like that, I don't understand how this stuff works. I've never used it, so I can't confirm it. I'm just regurgitating what I've read and heard from other people say. That using a sextant, you can calculate the sun is, I think, 36 to 40 miles across at 3,000 miles away. So obviously the dome has to be bigger than that. I've read some interesting stuff from the spinning heliocentric standard view of the cosmos that says there is an invisible barrier that is hard that secular scientists have described as being out there at about, I think it was 7,500 miles. So is that the firmament? I don't know. But if it's not, then they would push the firmament out beyond that. So, I would say at a minimum, it's probably 75 to 10,000 miles out. I don't know, but when you start looking into things like the Van Allen belts, and NASA's really shooting themselves in the foot with the Orion project, there's a number of videos that they've been putting out saying, we haven't solved the radiation problem yet for Orion. And I'm like, wait a minute, you guys supposedly sent dudes in the tin can and jumpsuits through the thing, 12 times, 6 times there and back to the moon. Why don't you just put them in the same jumpsuits in the same tin can? And oh, by the way, why don't you put on the same jumpsuit and go clean up Fukushima while you're at it?
Yeah.
If it's so good at, So, there's a reason why the space shuttle program never went more than 400 miles out. And I also wonder, when you look at the various launches from Cape Canaveral and other places too, it never goes straight up. You always see the thing go up and make this big arc.
Right.
And the ones that didn't make the arc explode, like some of the civilian ones that have gone up. Are they hitting the dome? I don't know. People need to look into Project Fishbowl, Operation Fishbowl, because, as soon as Admiral Byrd goes down to Antarctica in the 1940s through the late 50s, and they go to Operation Deep Freeze. After Operation Deep Freeze, everybody pulls out of Antarctica, and they draft up the Antarctic Treaty. And this is an international treaty. All these different countries that were previously down there saying, this place is great, this place is amazing, all of the natural resources you can imagine are down here, this place is awesome. Well, they all pull out of there, leave there, sign the Antarctic Treaty saying nobody can go back, except under the express guidelines of the treaty, under very specific restrictions. And then immediately, NASA's created, 1958. Same time all this Antarctic Treaty is taking place, they formed NASA in 1958. And then NASA and or the United States and Russia start launching high-altitude nuclear bombs into the atmosphere, and they called it Operation freaking Fishbowl. So if they're trying to avoid a conspiracy, they aren't helping with the names.
Right.
And if you do a Google search or YouTube search of Operation Fishbowl and look at the explosions and how they took what they look like, it looks like they're hitting something. So I don't know. I don't know how high it is, but it's really interesting.
Hey Rob, we've arrived to the end of the show. I appreciate all of you. We'd love to have you back on, brother, because it seems like we didn't get very far, and there's so much more to talk about.